Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again. Tomorrow's Friday, Parashat Chukat. This is a very special portion, the Paraduma, the red heifer. But on a personal note, this is the portion of my wedding, because my wife and I, Leah, we were married 40 years ago, and this portion was the portion I read before my wedding. So it means a lot to us. This week, we'll be celebrating our 40th year anniversary. It's hard to believe so many years have gone by. Baruch Hashem, we have to be so thankful to Hashem on the personal miracles and looking at everything we have, those who merit in children and grandchildren. You see the blessing, how the family continues. It's a very special thing. So this portion sits deep in my heart. And I've spoken about in the past and different aspects of the portion. Today I want to focus on, first of all, there are things that hint to the current events, and we've been through. As we all know, we're still going through the story of October 7th, where we were literally caught off guard, and how things were reversed in the year and a half. The miracles we saw, and the crumbling of Hezbollah, the crumbling of the Syrian regime, and the Iranians in the last couple of weeks, the miracle of that. And that is something that we have to be so thankful for. And we have to say Hallel. We have to praise Hashem and thank God for being so kind to us and for bringing us these miracles, because if God forbid these evil forces will let to continue to grow and strengthen their armed forces against Israel, the danger would be great for our people. And we see how Hashem is always looking out for us. And this week's portion, there are literally hints to this, in these kind of things that we have to do to praise Hashem, to be thankful to Hashem. And I've spoken on that aspect in the past of learning to be what we call hakarat tov. It's one of the fundamental principles of the Torah, is to be grateful when someone does something good to you, to be grateful to it, and to Hashem, to be grateful to that person. Whoever does that goodness to you, you have to be thankful and grateful, and that's one of the greatest principles of the Torah. And I want to show you some great hints regarding this. First of all, it says in the Talmud in Berachot 54a, a person sees a place where miracles happen to Israel. What does he say? Baruch she'asa nisim la'avoteinu b'makom hazeh. He says, we have to say, blessed be God who's brought miracles to our forefathers in this place. And the examples are brought down of different places where miracles were done. Ma'bot hayam, when we crossed over the Red Sea. Ma'bot hayarden, where we crossed over the Jordan River. And the third one mentioned in the list here, I'm reading from the Talmud, it says Mabrot Nachalei Arnon. That's what I'll talk about now in this week's portion, because this is related to in our portion where we crossed over Nachalei Arnon. And let me give you a little background. What exactly is Nachalei Arnon? Nachalei Arnon is mentioned in this week's portion where Israel, let's do a little quick review. Israel is traveling. It's from the desert. We're talking about approaching the end of our 40 years. We're less than that. Aaron passes away, Miriam passes away, so around 38 years in the desert. Well, the first 2 years we were parked in one area, and then the sin of the spies, and everything was delayed for 38 years until we finally entered the land, etc. And so this is around, you can say, since coming out of Egypt, 38 years have passed. We're in the last year and a half or so left before actually Moshe Rabbeinu passing away and Israel entering the land under Joshua. And at this moment of time, Israel is passing, it's on the way, it's making its move towards the land, and they request permission from the Edomites to cross over. Their territory would make it easier. If you look at the map, coming across, going through Edom would be very easy for Israel from that way to make our way. As we know today, Edom is in the southern part of, if you ever go to Eilat. So right across from the part of the sea, of what we call the Red Sea, which is the Yam Suf, the part that protrudes into Israel, that connects the port of Eilat to the Red Sea, that area is literally, if you look across into the Jordanian side today, you can see the mountains above. Those mountains are the mountains of Edom. Now Israel wanted us to cross, coming out of Egypt. We wanted to cross through Edom. It would make it easy to enter the land of Israel. But the Edomites refused, and we had to go back towards, again, the Yam Suf, towards the Red Sea, and then from there, we had to circumvent and go around until finally, eventually, we were able to make our way to the land. As we all know, we came up to Alvot Yericho, the area near Jericho, and that's where Israel crossed under the leadership of Joshua. We entered the land. It was near Mabrot Yarden, right across from the city of Jericho is where we entered. Now, what happened in here, I'm going to read about the Talmud, tells us the story of Arnon. Arnon, as we know, is a riverbed that crosses sort of the central part of the Sea of the Dead Sea. On the northern part of that river, it was the area, the territory of the Amorites, the Amori, and the southern part, continuing, was part of Moab. Now, it used to be all up in the hands of Moab, but as our portion talks about, the Amori took it over from the Moabites, and they gained control until the river of Arnon. Now, Israel, having to go around, eventually was actually walking through that area by Moab and Amori, between the borders of those two countries. And Israel's crossing through, and the Talmud talks like this. The Talmud says, I read exactly what it's brought down in the Talmud over here. Tana. Okay, the Talmud says like this. We learn in a Braita, Et vahev besufa. There's a very interesting verse, and I'll first quote the verse. The verse says like this. Let me first quote the verse. The verse says like this in Numbers, number 21, verse number 14 and 15. Al ken ye'amar. It says, therefore, ye'amar b'sefer milchamot Hashem. It will be said in the book of wars of God. Now, what does it mean in the book of war of God? Here is referring not to a full book, but people talking about great events, about the wars of God will be spoken about. Et vahev besufa. And it mentions et vahev besufa. Here is a question how to explain those words. I'll get that into a moment. Veta nichalim Arnon, and the river Arnon. And then it goes on to say, the eshed nichalim, the flow of the river. The river is Asher Natal Shevet Ar, which was moving towards the city of Ar. V'nish'an legvul Moab, was pushing literally into the border of Moab. What does this really mean? It's a little difficult to understand these verses. What happened over here? So the Talmud, which I'm reading to you now, is revealing to us what those things mean. And the Talmud says like this. The Talmud says, we learn in a Braita, Et vahev besufa, shnei mitzorim ayu. They were two lepers. Okay? Et vahev besufa. And so we can understand the word here, et, as being a name, which is unusual. There are certain commentators explaining it that way. Vahev, they were et vahev. So et is one name, vahev was the other name, or hav. But it says in the Bible, vahev. And those two lepers, since they weren't allowed to enter the camp, they were going in back of the camp of Israel. So when Israel was going by, and as I said before, we were forced to go around. And then we came by the riverbed of Arnon and the border between the Amorites and the Moabites. And there was a I'll just quickly explain what went on. There was a very, very narrow crossing over there. And these two lepers were hiding in the cracks of the riverbed. There were these two very high, it's like a canyon on both sides, and they were hiding in some kind of caves over there. And these two lepers, and the Amorites had a whole plan of ambush, so they themselves were hiding in these caves. There were a lot of caves alongside, because along the crevices of the canyon over there. And they were hiding there, and they were planning an ambush for Israel. And they said when Israel will go by, they're going to strike Israel and ambush Israel, trying to enter the land of Israel. That was the plan. Now Rashi brings this down. Rashi right away brings down this, fascinating Talmud piece. And Rashi says, and I want to read his words because it's literally prophecy, as the way he describes it. And Rashi says, what does it mean? Ve'eshad hanichalim. Rashi says, shefech hanichalim shenishpach sham. Right? What does it mean? The rivers that there was flowing. So Rashi says, shenishpach sham dam emoraim. the blood of the Emori was spilled over there. Why? Shayu nichbaim sham, they were hiding out in those caves, as we said, from the Talmud. Rashi is explaining the Talmud. Lefi shayu he'arim ha'gvorim, the mountains, I said, were very, very tall. V'nachal amok, and the canyon was very, very deep. V'katzar, and very narrow. Ve'arim smuchim, the mountains were very close to one another. Adam omed al har mizeh u'medaber im chaviro b'har mizeh. It was like close enough that one person could stand on this side of the mountain and talk to his friend on the other side of the mountain. That was the border between Moab and Emorah, the Amorites. V'haderech over toch hanachal. So literally that they passed through this river bed. Amur amorim sheyikansu l'Yisrael letoch hanachal lavo. So what did the Amorites say? When Israel will pass through the river to go through, neitzei min ha'me'arot beharim shelamala mehem v'na'algeim. We're going to come out of the caves and we're going to start to kill the Israelites when they're going across. And how are they going to do so? Bechitzim u'ba'avnei belistraot. So they're going to kill them with arrows and with avnei belistraot. This is what I found fascinating. What is avnei belistraot? That refers to rockets. Literally, avanim, stones, belistraot, right? It's like ballistic missiles. That's the word, it's a Greek word. Belistraot, Rashi is saying, we're talking about they had special kinds of rockets that they made. Then it was used by rockets out of stone, these missiles. They would shoot when Israel would come across, when they would shoot on them those huge rocks. Rashi says something fascinating. This is, again, based on the Gemara I just read. I just cut it short, the Talmud. Is that there was on one side the caves, and the other side there were where they were hiding out the Emorai, and on the other side was protrusions that were sticking out like horns. And what happened was, this is what the miracle we saw. Kivan sheba'u Yisrael la'avor nizda'azah ha'har shel Eretz Yisrael. So when Israel came to go through, the whole mountain shook. It was like a little earthquake over there. As a woman, or as a shifcha, like a maidservant is coming to greet her mistress, so she's coming out to meet her queen that she's serving her queen, and she's running after the same way. You can picture these rocks, protrusions coming and entering those crevices of the mountain, the other side of the mountain, because of the earthquake. V'nitkarev litzad har shel Moav v'nichnesu otan hashadayim letoch otan nikaim v'ragum. So what Rashi says is that, based on the Talmud, is that the protrusions entered the caves and literally crushed the Amoraim, the Amorites. That's what he explains the verse over here. So this miracle, going back, what it says, Al Ken Ya'amer, therefore we said in the book of the Wars of Hashem, we're talking about Vahe v'Sufa. Vahe v'Sufa, according to the Talmud, refers to two lepers. But Rashi explains in a simple way, it could also mean a simple way, et Vahe v'Sufa. It's like what God did, yet Vahev is like Yehev, to give in Aramaic. In other words, the people be talking about what God did, a Besufa. Besufa means, is a hint to Yam Suf, by the Red Sea area, right? So that refers to, what does that refer to? The miracle we just spoke about, that the Nechalim Arnon, and the riverbed of Arnon, which was flowing with blood of the Amorites, because they try to ambush Israel. And they try to bring upon us these rockets, ballistic missiles, and all that. But here we see they were crushed with the rocks coming together, with the mountains coming together. And this literally is a miracle that took place in this portion, Parashat Chukat. And it's fascinating how it's so similar to what's going on today. We have these nations of the world that are coming, the Iranians with their whole, as we say, the head of the snake is trying to have his proxies destroy Israel, and at the end they get crushed, and they're all getting crushed by Israel, because of course it's all the miracles, little Israel. We're just a little simple people, and here Hashem fights our battles and gives us the strength to do things that could only superpowers in the world could do. I mean, look what's going on Russia is being stuck in the mud of Ukraine. And the superpower, Russia, supposed to be a huge superpower, is not succeeding really that much in Ukraine for many, many years in battle. And little Israel is able to cross over this huge airspace, going across from the west all the way to the Iranians, and able to fly literally over their airspace in freedom and do what it has to do to eliminate the threats against Israel. Israel is looked upon today as a superpower. It's unbelievable, little Israel. And this is because, of course, our secret weapon is the creator of the universe. We must be so thankful. And therefore, the Talmud opens up, when we go to the very places where these miracles happened, we must say a blessing to thank Hashem, to always be thankful to the greatness of these miracles, thankful to Hashem for the great miracles He brings upon us. And that's one little thing. We could look at so many different things that have taken place and say to ourselves, my goodness, how many miracles, how many miracles. So wanted to open up with that fascinating hint to what's going on, but there are many more, and we'll see if I can do a little bit more in our time frame. And I want to mention something else. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which I found interesting, is that if we look in the book of the book of Dvarim, Deuteronomy in English, in Parashat Kiteitzeh, the Torah tells us, if we look in chapter 23, verse 4 and 5, what does the Torah tell us? It says, Lo yavo Amoni u'Moavi b'kal Hashem. An Ammonite or a Moabite cannot enter, right? Ammoni refers to Umoavi, referring to the males of Ammon and Moab. They cannot become part of the house of Israel. Dor asiri lo yavo, even a 10th generation Moab male cannot enter the house of Israel. We know that Ruth was a Moabite, she was a Moabite woman, and she was allowed to. But the men are not allowed to. And the question is why? Why can't they enter the house of Israel? Even 10 generations later. And the Torah gives a reason. The Torah says, Al dvar asher lo kidmu etchem, belechem uvemayim, because they did not greet you with bread and water when you came out of Egypt. Asher ve'asher sachar alecha et Bilam ben Beor miptor aram naraim lekaleka. Right? And they also hired an assassin, Biliam, as we all know, Bilam ben Beor. He was a hired assassin to curse Israel. So because of these two things, they weren't allowed to become part of the house of Israel. God said you can't let them convert to Judaism. Now, if we think about it, in this week's portion, the Torah talks about two scenarios, two situations where Israel was, as in the beginning, if we read about it, we requested from the Edomites to go through the land, and they refused. They refused to allow us to go through the land, and they came to the borders of their country, of Edom. They came with swords and said, if you go into the border, we're going to war against you. So Israel went around, and then they came and requested from the Amorites, and the Sichon, Melech Emori, they come against Israel in battle, and Israel then conquers their land, etc. So, and then eventually that's given to the tribes on the other side of the Jordan. So we see here that the Torah is talking about these two countries, one Ammon and Moab, three countries, they're like a double brother, two brothers, and then the Amorites. They did not allow Israel to pass through the land, and it talks also, correction, it doesn't talk about Ammon and Moab. Ammon and Moab we spoke about before. That's my question. It talks about Edom, two countries, the Edomites, and it talks about the Amorites. When I meant two brothers, we have Og, Sichon and Og. But anyway, right? So it talks about them and saying they didn't allow us to cross over the land. One didn't allow us, but we went around. The other one was active to fight against us, and then we conquered the land, Sichon, etc. And then Og, we went to battle against Og as well. So my question here is what happened to Ammon and Moab, that in the book of Deuteronomy and Dvarim, it talks about how they're not allowed to enter the house of Israel because they didn't come out to greet us with bread and water. But it should be mentioned, in this week's portion. It's really not mentioned there. I don't see it mentioned anywhere in the portion. It's just that it's dafka it's mentioned in relation with the Edomites and the Amorites, that they didn't want to give us to go through their land. In other words, we weren't able to go through the land, so we couldn't buy water from them. We could, whatever it was, we couldn't even. Israel offered to say, "Well, buy water, we'll get purchase food," but no, it didn't. They didn't let us go through the land at all. But it doesn't talk about Ammon and Moab. Only later on we see this. Now, obviously, Israel was right over there, but here, if you look at the word in Hebrew, what it means, "Ashelo kidmu etchem belechem v'mayim." It means they didn't. Kidmu means to actually do something active, to go out and bring you bread and water. So if we look at the explanation, the Nachmanides is a fascinating explanation. The Nachmanides says like this. It says, "Yilchika katuv shnei achim ha'ele, shiyu gmulei chesed Avraham shetzila vihem v'imam min hacherev v'hashvi." What does the Ramban say? He's saying that it was these two brothers, Ammon and Moab, that God has allowed them to become part of the house of God, of Israel, joining the house of Israel. Why? Because look what happened. Avraham Avinu, Abraham, he saved the life of Lot, their great-great-grandfather, the father of those two, countries. ובזכותו של החם השם יתברך מתוך אפיך. והם חייבים לעשות טובה עם ישראל ועשוי מהם רעה. In other words, they were given such a blessing because of Abraham and Abraham's seed, and how Hashem fought for them. Literally, destroying, as we know the whole story of turning over Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot was captured, Abraham comes to get him out of the captivity. We all know the whole story. And instead of running after Israel, thanking Israel with bread and water, doing something of showing appreciation, they did not do so. They didn't come out and bring us bread and water. And he goes, not only that, he goes on to say, of course, they also hired the assassin Bileam to curse Israel. Okay. And the Rambam goes on to say, and he says like this, והנה עמון הרשיע בזה יותר כי המואבים ובני עשיו, כאשר ידעו שהוזהרו ישראל שלא יתגאו בם, הוציאו להם לחם ומים. ועמון לא אהבה לעשות כן. Rambam's going even more so. Eventually there was a wake-up call when Israel passed through and they didn't let them go through their territory, but they saw that they were going around, so they came out to Israel. The Edomites came out, and the Amorites came out to sell water to Israel, to bring water to Israel and bread. So that's when the Rambam says, that's when Israel was going around. At the end, they brought them the bread. Because it says, "Ki haMoavim u'bnei Esav asher yadu she'uzu Yisrael lo yitga'u hem hotziu lehem lechem mayim." I'm sorry, the Moabites and the Edomites, they brought bread out to Israel when they saw Israel was going to go through the land. But Ammon didn't want to take part of this at all. Ammon, it says, refused totally. וזה הטעם שלא קידמו, שלא יצאו לקראתם בלחם מים אשר עשו אחרים. ולכן הקדים הכתוב Ammon. So Rambam is saying, why is it mentioned Ammon first? Because Ammon did not want to, didn't even consider, even after Israel was not even go through their land, to bring out water. Here you have a whole nation that need to think about it. I mean, people talk about humanitarian aid. Little Israel's coming out of Egypt, just wants water, lechem, little bread and water as they go through, but they refuse to bring them supplies. And that is really this lack of showing gratefulness, gratitude to what was done for them is terrible in God's eyes. The fact that the Edomites, they didn't let us go through the land, whatever. Okay, God forgave them for that. They have other merit that they weren't. God didn't say they can't join the house of Israel, the Edomites. So he said God didn't punish them for that. Because we can understand, or maybe they're afraid going through the land, but to bring out food and water to people in need, going around your country, showing great gratefulness that what the miracles that was done to your parents, Lot, your great grandparents, they should have come out and offered that to Israel. And the Ammon did not at all participate in any way. They didn't want to have that. And Moab, after this all happened, they try to make up for it later on to bring, but it was only after Israel went around. It mentions that the Rambam is mentioning, he doesn't bring the source where it's brought down, but the Rambam says that they did come out with water later. But therefore they were punished. They were punished for not making the initiative. What is it to the shelo kidem? Kidem is not, you're not waiting to be asked, but you run out first and you show that you want to pay back someone. So you should come from your side, your initiative to do that special thing. So we don't see that, we don't see that, unfortunately, here. Well, they were punished greatly for it, not being allowed to join the house of Israel. So that is, a fascinating thing. But I wanted to mention is it's interesting. It's sort of not really mentioned in our portion. It's sort of, mentioned later on, but for some reason it was skipped over here. That's one question I want to try to understand. Why was it skipped over? Why wasn't it hinted to in this situation? Only later on we mentioned that. That's one question. Question number 2 takes us to the opening of the portion, which talks about the red heifer. And we see within the red heifer, the Torah tells us, V'lakach hakohen eitz erez, the high priest, or the sgan, the second in command, he's supposed to take the eitz erez, the cedar tree, a branch of a cedar branch, ve'ezov, and a hyssop, which is a very, very low little thing that grows here in Israel. You all know it's like oregano. Ushni tolat, a piece of wool that has colored with the color, the dye of a tolat, refers to these literally means a worm, but here it's not these little insects. We call them in Hebrew knimot. And vishlich el toch srefat hapa. And this he has to throw inside the paraduma when it's being burned, the red heifer. So the question here is, we see the ingredients. The eitz erez on one side, this big cedar tree. The ezov, this little short oregano plant, and together with this wool that's colored with the dye of an insect. So the question here is, what is the connection of these different pieces that are put in, that we put inside the ashes of the red heifer? And I'd like to mention is that, if we think about where does this come up again in the other parts of the Torah, we see 2 other locations where these things are mentioned, similar ingredients. And we see one very, very that stands out is in Vayikra, Leviticus, in Parashat Mitzorah, where it talks about the purification process of the leper, and it requires 2 birds, and it requires eitz erez ushni tolat ve'ezov. It requires the same thing, the eitz erez, the cedar branch, ushni tolat. There mentions shni tolat first, which we have to think about why. Commentaries do talk about that, and then which is the colored wool, and then it mentions the ezov. So we see a very interesting connection that from the red heifer, the ingredients that brings the purity to the red heifer, the same ingredients that brings the purity to purify the person from leprosy. So what is the connection between the red heifer, which purifies someone from uncleanliness to the dead, to the purification of the leper? We see that connection right there. And there's one other situation where we see is somehow connected to it, because the Ibn Ezra, one of the great commentaries for the Middle Ages, an early Middle Age commentator, and he brings down the connection. He says this is also a hint to Passover. We look in Passover of the coming out of Egypt. We see that one similar ingredient was used when it came to placing the blood on the mashkof, on the doorposts. And the door frame was used, they used the ezov, the same hyssop plant. A bushel of that was used in order to use it as like a paintbrush to paint the blood on the post. So we see, so he compares it. He said this is similar in a way, and he brings that reflection of these sources. So the question is, how do we unite these 3 different sources? Number 1, the leper, purification of the person from the dead, together with the Passover offering coming out of Egypt, which we used for that one time, was used the the Ezov. Something that seems to be bringing us, we have to think about that connection. Why does the Torah bring those same ingredients over there together? And here, I was thinking and trying to contemplate what could be a possible understanding of this. But and I found something very interesting is that the Midrash, Rabbeinu Bachya brings down, and he talks about the fact that the Eitz Erez, Ushni Tolad Veizov, he says, brings the Midrash in Tanchuma, and he says, Ma takanato shel zeh shenitga'eh וגבה כארז, ישפיל עצמו כאזוב ויתקפל לו. He's saying, what is a person's rectification? A person that has arrogance, and that he literally is acting like he's a cedar tree, which is a very tall tree. What is his rectification? That he should lower himself like an azov, which is a little bush. And this, he brings beforehand, is that we see that the Torah requires, on one hand, to take something from the tallest tree that exists, the erez, very tall tree, and something, a very short little bush. So it's those two things. He doesn't mention, at this point, the tolat, but we can add that together in other sources that the tolat refers to what's like a little worm, right? Literally means a little worm, a little insect, which reminds us, thinking about a worm is that it reminds of modesty, because it says in the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, a person should think about three things. And he thinks about these three things, he will not come to sin. What are they? Da ma'ayin bata, know from where you've come. La'an atolech, where are you going to? Ulefnei mi, and before who are you destined to give an accounting to? The King of the universe. And it says, where are you going to? A place of worms, tolat. So tolat is something also that a person thinks in this world he's like a cedar tree, a very tall tree with arrogance and all this, but at the end of the day, to realize that we are nothing but ending up like a little worm, a little place where worms, persons, body will decay. And that's sort of to remind us we have to be like a little modest, like a little azov bush, instead of trying to act arrogant like the cedars of Lebanon, those tall trees, to think that we're here forever and it's all about us and all that. So we see in these three aspects of the Torah, what is coming to cleanse a person from certain kind of things. We'll talk about that in a moment. Number one, let's begin to talk about it, is the leper. The leper is a person who speaks lashon hara. A person who talks evil lashon hara is a person that's full of arrogance, that he feels he can talk about somebody else. Is he any better? Right away, most of the time when a person is mocking somebody else or coming against somebody else, think about how he behaves. So think about, wait a second, is he better than that person that he's trying to talk bad about? I'm sure he has a lot of those qualities himself. Most of the time when people come to talk about other people, they have the same follies themselves. So the idea of a leper, as we know, a person gets leprosy when he talks lashon, he doesn't have control, when the arrogance, something that brings about that leprosy. And therefore, that's the connection, number one. Number two, if we look in a person, in order to purify himself from a dead person, in this world, what are the major things for us to understand, as I just mentioned a moment ago, to remember where we're all going in the end. This world is a world that we have to work hard to do good and love and kindness, because in the end, it's a temporary world. So if we're going to be arrogant and try to be like the cedar trees and go over people and we're above everyone else, so at the end, remember where we're going to. And therefore, the whole concept of death is to remind us at the end of the day what we have to do in this world, because where we're going to, this world is temporary, where we're going to eventually end up as in the physical world. The physical is going to fall. Of course, we know that we're everlasting, the souls are everlasting, but the point is to realize that the physical, and most people are arrogant, they're not arrogant on the spiritual side, they're arrogant because the spiritual side, there's no arrogance there. When someone wants to just do good and connect to God, there's no arrogance there. Arrogance comes from the physical. Oh, I want more of this, I want more of that, I have more than you do. And look what I have. It's all. Sometimes people can be that way also on the intellectual side. Oh, I am smarter than you are, and show off his knowledge, etc. That's also can be a form of turning, certain knowledge into arrogance. Or on the intellectual side could be a lot of arrogance on that side as well. It doesn't have to be something that is only, on the physical, material side, but that's also material. When a person turns his knowledge into arrogance, that's material, that's poison. So that is the side of death, is actually reminding us all the time, wait a second, who am I? And with all the knowledge I've acquired, with all the wealth I've acquired, with all this, the achievements, at the end, where is that going to go if I don't focus on the most important thing? That's modesty, being like the Azov, the little bush. We have to be modest. So that connects very well. The same concepts are right there in arrogance. So what about the Passover? What about there? You see in the Passover, we don't see the other agreements. Here I'm quoting the Ibn Ezra, who actually compares it also to Passover. So I was thinking, okay, I can compare easily the story of the two matmet, uncleanliness to a dead person, the red heifer, and the leper. That's finally, we can connect that very well. But how do we connect that to the Passover story? That we took Azov in there. It's exactly the point. On Passover, we took only the Azov. Just, the enlightenment came to me on this. Is the Azov we took on Passover? What was the Azov? The bush. That simple bush, the little modest bush, to use it for, showing that God will pass over us, the miracle of Passover. And why the Azov? Because on Passover, think about it, we were a slave nation. And we were treaded upon by the Egyptians. And therefore, we were likened to the Azov. That's exactly the point. We have to, the whole story of Passover is when we realize that we're nothing, we're all in God's hands. We're a nation that was treaded upon and persecuted and was slave nation. And God lifted us up. And He brings pride to His nation and takes care of us. But we ourselves, what are we without Hashem? So that fits in right to the picture. It's in the middle of this whole picture. So it's perfectly aligned to this concept of arrogance versus being modest. And that's all right here connected to these concepts of the leper and, of course, the red heifer in our portion. And how does that connect to what I was saying beforehand? Well, it's all about arrogance. We spoke about those who do not want to greet us with bread and water, right? And after being treated so well, the Moabites and the Ammonites by Israel, by Abraham, our seed, our father, that went out and saved them. And instead of saying, wow, we have to thank you, they came against us. That's the most evil, disgusting behavior that can possibly be. It's all about arrogance. And it's fascinating, when I thought about it, in the story the Talmud brings, that the Torah, who is Vahev and Sufa? Who are they? Et Vahev, right? Besufa. Who are those two, there's two people we said before from the Talmud. It says they're lepers. The people that actually were going behind the camp, they were outside the camp, they were lepers. And they saw this miracle when they saw the blood coming out of the caves, when the mountain crushed them together. They came and told Israel of the great miracle that happened. So those lepers, therefore, were the ones who ended up revealing, when they saw a miracle themselves. So in other words, a wake-up call. So when people that are behind the camp, once they become a leper's punishment is to leave the camp because of speaking. So then they're sort of doing a rectification. And therefore they're able to see for themselves that a wake-up call, wow, look what's happened, look what's God becoming, a wake-up call to recognize the great miracles that are happening. And that's why they were mentioned the portion as well, that connects the portion to the lepers, that same thing. We see that connection here about the concept of modesty versus arrogance, which we see so powerfully over here in the portion. And therefore it's not mentioned. I say, why isn't Moab mentioned over here in that fashion, right? It's not mentioned, but we talks about the Edomites, I said, and it talks about the Amorim, but it doesn't mention that whole thing over here, and it mentions it later on in the book of Deuteronomy. It's sort of a hashlama, as we say, an addition to the information that takes place here. Sometimes the Torah, of course, will share. It says that Torah sometimes poor in one place and rich in another place. In other words, it fills in the gaps. But here, I think it wasn't mentioned purposely. Obviously, the Torah is eternal and everything is perfect. Why was it mentioned over here? Is that God purposely did not want to say, when you're supposed to come out and greet others, right? It's like a vacuum. Where are you? It's exactly the point. Where are you? Why is it mentioned? Because they weren't here. They should have been here. They should have woken up. It should have been a initiative on their part. And that's for the beautiful understanding of why is it just, a conclusion that came to me is that they're not here. They're not mentioned at all. It's like they're wiped out of the book. They should have been here. They should have come out to greet Israel with bread and water, and those who were good to them. So the lesson of Chukat, one of the many lessons of the portion that we spoke about in the past, has been to be grateful. And here we see another story of what gratefulness is modesty. When you're grateful, you're not thinking only about yourself. You're not self-centered. You're not arrogant. And this lesson is so important for us to be grateful. To be grateful to Hashem, who has brought these great miracles upon us. To be grateful to all those who have helped us in so many different ways. And that we have to give back when someone does good to us. And unfortunately, a lot of people are so self-centered, they don't know how to say thank you. And that is, I thought, of an important message here that we should learn from the portion. Let us learn to say thank you and be grateful. And after these, again, getting back to the stories that happened in the last months here in the land of Israel, we have so much to be grateful for in so many ways, for Hashem, for the miracles of saving your people. And of course, for all those wonderful friends of Itamar who are standing with us and helping and build the land and continue to help us to build the land. We have so much to do, and we are so grateful to all of you. And I want to express my gratefulness. And have a beautiful Shabbat Shalom, B'sorot Tovot, Yeshuot V'Nechemot.